Hello, welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. It's Funmi, the principal attorney at the law firm. Today's review, we're going to be looking at some AI terms. So essentially, we're going to be looking at this policy. Now, I talked a little bit about the distinction between a policy and a notice. Policies generally are internal documentations that are distributed to different stakeholders about what should be done when it comes to a specific topic. Here we're talking about a generative artificial intelligence policy. The reason we're reviewing this on the Data Privacy Lawyer is because the use of generative AI generally, I am yet to see a tool that does not have privacy implications. I'm just going to say it bluntly. Most generative AI in some capacity processes personal data, whether it was from the inception, like training, or whether it's the actual use of the tool, internally or externally. So there are implications under the data protection laws on how these are utilized, how they process personal data, and your business's obligations when it's being transparent to consumers, right? Okay. So we're not going to talk about purpose. We're going to talk about scope. This policy applies to students, employees, and other contracted third parties' use of generative AI applications or development of Gen AI models. I'm interested in how the organization is enforcing this policy on its contracted third parties. So we've taken a look on this channel on lots of different privacy notices and how influential utilizing third parties to process your business's personal data, and how detrimental it can be if it's not done appropriately and structured in a manner where your business retains its responsibilities as a controller, and any obligations that your processor, which generally a third party is, are displayed in a contractual manner. I'm not going to go too much into that. We're talking about AI today. But I think it's interesting that this policy applies to contracted third parties because third parties generally have their own internal practices. Now, we're going to go through the provisions here when it comes to privacy only, because that's what we're concerned with. We're concerned with privacy and its implications on artificial intelligence. But essentially, I would be interested in seeing what provisions are being placed in third-party contracts to ensure that this policy applies to them. I can definitely understand it from a student and employee perspective, but I would be interested to see how it applies to the contracted third parties' use of Gen AI applications. Because can a company really enforce its own internal policies on a contracted third party? Now, it may be there's a subsection of third parties. It may be that this policy doesn't apply to all contracted third parties. So maybe this provision here just needs a bit of fine tuning for clarity's sake. This policy also applies to the use of those applications on Seneca devices and on personal devices when used for any Seneca work or study purposes. Okay. Artificial intelligence technology that synthesizes new versions of text, audio, or visual imagery from bodies of data in response to user prompts. Let's talk about this, okay? Just in this half a sentence, right, we've identified different areas that could implicate privacy. Let's say, for example, right, I send a text to my friend. In that text, I provide my home address, I provide my name, and I provide, let's say, my mother's information, right? Any information that identifies an individual constitutes personal data, to include text, right? Audio. You're listening to this YouTube video, right? I've already mentioned my name. I've mentioned the name of my firm, and I've continued talking, right? So you're able to identify me through my audio. Now, for visual imagery, if you've ever looked at any of my LinkedIn's or you've looked at any of my TikToks, you're able to identify my name, my firm, the information associated with my business, like my business telephone number, and you're able to identify my face, right? So artificial intelligence is synthesizing all of these different groups of information that could constitute personal data, which is why just using AI and not thinking about your data protection implications is not a wise idea for any business, because there are regulators that influence and investigate businesses that don't process personal data in adherence to the law. So you need to not only be able to understand the law, but understand the implications for your usage of personal data within your business. Okay, let's go down. Okay, let's talk about this. Protecting Seneca's data and IT systems. To maintain the security of Seneca's data and IT systems, students and employees are prohibited from attempting to gain access to unapproved Gen AI applications when using Seneca systems or networks, conducting business on behalf of Seneca, or when using the institution's data. Now, this is crucial. And this, to me, is a true policy. And one of the reasons I specifically picked this is because a lot of organizations will place a document on their website and they will call it a privacy policy, right? A policy essentially informs different individuals on how practices are done within an organization. A notice presents individuals with facts about what's happening internally. There is a very big distinction, okay? And what we do at the Data Privacy Lawyer is we educate businesses on making this distinction so that the documents that they're presenting on their website are truthful about what it is that they are actually trying to provide to the consumers that are applicable. Okay. To maintain the confidentiality of Seneca's sensitive or confidential information, these groups should only input such information into Gen AI systems that Seneca has approved for use in accordance with other Seneca privacy and confidentiality policies. Now you can see here, right, this is so crucial. You can see here that they're telling their consumers, and the consumers applicable here are those that we identified above, the students, employees, and contracted third parties. They're saying that in order to maintain their confidentiality, you should only input information that's been approved, right? The flip side to this is that I'm presuming that their notice, the AI notice or privacy notice that they have, states, we maintain our confidentiality by only approving certain information into Gen AI systems. That's factual, right? That's a fact. They're not trying to educate anyone. They're not trying to inform anyone what should be done internally. They're saying this is what our privacy practice is, and we are displaying that on a privacy notice, as opposed to this policy we're reviewing that's educating and informing employees about how they can use the Gen AI systems. Okay, I really enjoyed reviewing this. I think this is a very, very good policy. Now, that was based off of a 10-minute YouTube video. So if your business is looking at creating a policy, or you want guidance on how to structure your own privacy program in a compliant manner, take a look at my description below. I'd love to work with your organization. I'll see you in another video.